She died, giving birth to triplets. The mistress was happy, until the DNA test. They called Sienna a humble wife, but she was a genius in disguise. While her husband Sterling and his mistress planned her downfall, Sienna was securing her triplets' future. She died, giving birth, leaving behind a DNA test that didn't just break Sterling's heart, it bankrupted his entire life. Before we reveal the shocking name on that DNA test, make sure to join our Mr. James family community. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a story of justice and heart. Now let's get back to Sterling's biggest mistake. Sienna's morning began before the sun fully dared to rise. The city hummed faintly outside her floor-to-ceiling windows, a distant pulse she barely noticed. Inside, the air was heavy, perfumed with the faint scent of Sterling's aftershave and the cold perfection of polished marble. Her reflection in the window looked serene, but her chest felt tight, like a bird trapped in a gilded cage. Sterling appeared in the kitchen, crisp shirt, perfectly tied tie, espresso in hand. He moved like he owned not just the house, but the world. His eyes met hers briefly, calculating, sharp, like a trader scanning the market for weakness. "Morning," he said, his tone polite but edged with something that always felt like judgment. Sienna smiled, the curve of her lips soft, practiced. "Good morning," she replied, her voice calm, steady. She watched him swirl the espresso, tilt the cup toward the light as if he were inspecting gold. Every motion precise. Every motion meant something. She had studied him long enough to know that every glance, every pause, every flicker of his eyes contained unspoken intentions. She set down her sketch pad, pretending to adjust her brushes. Sterling did not notice, or perhaps he chose not to. The home sparkled, but it did not comfort her. Crystal chandeliers reflected light across the polished floors, expensive rugs muted the sound of footsteps, and yet each corner whispered betrayal. She had sensed it long before, the quiet laughter that lingered too long in hallways, the subtle touch of hands on arms that were not hers to touch. Sloane, Sterling's assistant, not just an assistant. She had learned the truth months ago. Sloane laughed too freely, lingered too close, and wore an arrogance that masked ambition. She had been careful at first, watching, noting, observing every interaction with Sterling. The way he would glance at her, even in passing, with a spark Sienna would never get. The way Sloane's hand brushed his shoulder, as if it were a private joke only they could share. Sienna did not confront them. She knew the danger of confrontation. She had learned early in life that silence could cut deeper than the sharpest blade. Words, she understood, could be weaponized, but silence could destroy from within. She kept her composure, even as her heart screamed. She turned back to her art. Canvases leaned against the walls, some half-finished, others filled with raw emotion. Faces she had painted seemed to stare back at her, understanding more than Sterling ever could. Each stroke was a silent rebellion, a declaration that she existed on her own terms, even in a home where she felt invisible. Sterling moved through the house with casual authority, checking schedules on his phone, nodding at staff who seemed afraid of his glare. Sloane arrived soon after, breezing in with the kind of confidence that bordered on arrogance. She carried Sterling's messages, laughed at his jokes a beat too late, leaned just a little too close. Sienna noticed it all, the way she had trained herself to notice the world in sharp, acute detail. Sienna's stomach twisted. She wanted to scream, to shatter the glasses, to throw the paintings across the room, but she did none of those things. Instead, she continued sketching, each line a secret diary, each shade a shield. The world outside would never know the quiet war she was waging in the heart of her own home. Sterling poured wine later that evening, calling for 2 glasses. The clink of crystal filled the air, but Sloane joined him at the counter, and the two laughed lightly, toasting as if the entire universe were their playground. Sienna watched from the shadows, the familiar ache of invisibility settling in her chest. She imagined the life that awaited her children if they ever inherited his world. She could not allow it. The thought made her chest tighten, and she whispered to herself, a vow only she would hear. They will never know the cruelty I see. They will never inherit his darkness. Hours passed. The house quieted, but tension lingered. Sterling and Sloane's laughter faded into echoes, and Sienna finally set down her brush, rubbing tired eyes. She felt the weight of her own heartbeat, the reminder that she was alive and yet constrained. Alive, yet unnoticed. Her phone buzzed on the table. A message from her gallery. A buyer had purchased her latest painting anonymously. She smiled faintly. Cyrus Vance, she thought, though she did not know his name. Just a man who had quietly admired her work, giving her hope, giving her independence. The thought gave her strength. Even in this gilded prison, she was not entirely powerless. Even in a house filled with betrayal, she could plan, observe, and protect. Her children, yet unborn, would know a mother's love, a mother's foresight, a mother's courage. Sterling's shadow passed the doorway, and she looked up, eyes steady. He did not notice the silent defiance burning in her gaze. He never did. Sloane lingered nearby, and Sienna allowed herself a fleeting thought of the irony. They believed they held power. They were blind. They had never seen her truly. The evening darkened, and the mansion's lights glittered like false stars. Sienna moved quietly to the balcony, breathing in the cold night air. Her reflection in the glass showed calm eyes, but beneath the surface, a storm churned. Every plan, every thought, every heartbeat was aligned with one purpose: her children and the life they would inherit. She thought of Sterling, his arrogance, the way he would never imagine a consequence. She thought of Sloane, her ambition, her cruelty disguised as charm, and she thought of herself, a quiet woman with an unyielding heart, ready to fight in silence. A sudden noise from the hallway made her start. Footsteps. Sterling returning, she assumed, but they sounded closer than expected. She froze, listening, every muscle taut, mind racing. The balcony door clicked open, a shadow stretching across the floor. Sienna's breath caught, a presence she hadn't expected. Her eyes narrowed, heart quickened, pulse thundering. She knew she could not confront him, could not reveal her awareness. Yet she also knew that something had shifted. The air was heavier, tighter, as if the mansion itself waited for the first move in a game that had been silent for too long. Sienna turned slightly, hiding behind the curtain, the night air brushing her cheek, and whispered to herself, "They think they control everything, but control is an illusion." A creak echoed from the hallway again. Her pulse doubled. The storm in her chest grew stronger, mixing fear and resolve. She touched the envelope hidden beneath her sketchpad, fingers tightening around the paper that would one day reveal all secrets. A soft click, a key in the door. Sterling's voice murmured in the distance, followed by laughter not meant for her ears. Sienna's eyes flitted to the shadows, calculating, waiting, knowing the first move would come soon. Her hand hovered over the brush, then rested again. Patience. The night was long, and she had learned that storms could be weathered quietly, their true force revealed only when the moment was right. And in that silence, she felt it, a whisper of destiny brushing against her soul, a promise that even in darkness, she would protect what mattered most. Her lips curved into the smallest of smiles. "They will never take my children, never. Not while I can breathe." The footsteps drew closer, a soft thud against the marble floor. Sienna froze, breath shallow. The shadow lengthened, a figure moving with intent. And just as the figure appeared fully in the doorway, the lights flickered. Her eyes widened, heart stopping, and then the door slowly creaked open. The figure in the doorway paused, hand resting on the doorknob. Sienna could see the glint of a ring catching the dim light. She realized in a heartbeat that this was no ordinary visitor, and this presence would change everything she had been silently planning. Her stomach twisted, and she whispered to herself, "It begins." The first light of dawn crept over the horizon, casting a pale glow across the bedroom. Sienna's eyes fluttered open, the sheets tangled around her like chains she refused to acknowledge. A sharp pang shot through her abdomen, sudden and unforgiving, stealing her breath for a fraction of a second. Her hand instinctively pressed to her stomach, feeling the small, wriggling movements of 3 tiny lives inside her. Triplets. The word echoed in her mind, heavy with weight, heavy with responsibility. Panic flared, brief and fierce. She had prepared for everything, yet the reality of it hit harder than any canvas could capture. A trembling exhalation, and she steadied herself. Determination replaced panic. Her children, 3 souls she had carried and nurtured quietly, hidden from a world that often overlooked her strength, needed her courage. She would not fail them. Not now. Not ever. From the hallway came the faint sound of clinking glasses, the casual laughter of Sterling and Sloane. They toasted, the sound grating against the tight coil of anxiety and resolve in Sienna's chest. Oblivious, completely oblivious. She pressed her hand to the sketch pad on her bedside table, fingers tightening around the pencil. She imagined the portraits she had painted, the faces of people who had no idea what strength looked like. She wanted her children to inherit that strength, not Sterling's arrogance, not Sloane's ambition. Another pang hit, sharper this time, and she gasped. Her breathing became a careful rhythm, each exhale a whispered promise to the little lives inside her. "I will protect you. I will fight for you. I will never let them take your life from you." The walls of the room seemed to shrink, closing in with the weight of both fear and determination. She could feel the cold marble beneath her bare feet as she slowly made her way to the bathroom, gripping the counter for the balance. The scent of antiseptic mingled with something else, something sharp, clinical, almost suffocating. The hospital. The reality of it hit her. Nurses moved swiftly, their expressions professional, practiced, efficient. There was no time for sentiment, no pause to marvel at the miracle of life. Each movement of the staff reminded her of the paradox she had always known. Life and death existed side by side, always balancing, always teetering. She felt every contraction like a hammer on her ribs, her body betraying her with pain, yet fulfilling a sacred purpose at the same time. Sterling's phone buzzed in her mind, though she didn't see it. He would call soon, impatient, arrogant, assuming the moment was about his wealth or control. Sloane would be nearby too, laughing lightly, making the scene a spectacle that had nothing to do with love or life. And yet Sienna's thoughts were elsewhere, on the tiny, perfect hearts beating within her, demanding that she summon all her courage and all her clarity. The labor room was stark, sterile, but Sienna felt a surge of energy she had never known before. She gritted her teeth as another contraction tore through her, forcing a sharp intake of breath. She whispered their names in her mind, 3 names she had chosen long before the world had caught wind of her pregnancy. Each name a promise, a shield against a world she could not yet control. She imagined holding them, seeing their tiny hands curl around her fingers, hearing the first defiant cries that would mark their entrance into life. Hours blurred, time stretching, bending, folding in on itself. Pain and exhaustion mingled, yet her focus never wavered. Nurses encouraged, doctors instructed, machines beeped rhythmically. Every sound, every command, every pressure of hands against her back reminded her. She was the conduit. She was the bridge between life and death, and failure was not an option. A sudden, sharp cry escaped one of the infants, high-pitched and demanding, cutting through the haze of pain. Sienna's heart lurched. She'd done it, the first one, perfect, wailing with life and defiance. A nurse swept forward, wrapping the baby in a soft blanket, placing it beside Sienna for a fleeting, fragile moment. Tears stung her eyes, but she blinked them away, refusing distraction. Two more cries followed, overlapping and merging into a symphony of survival. Triplets, alive, defiant. Her heart both soared and shattered at the same time, but joy was brief. A darkness clawed at the edges of her vision, creeping inward like a tide swallowing the shore. Her body shook, exhaustion overwhelming strength. Her chest burned, lungs gasping for air. She could not move, could not speak, could not fully embrace the tiny miracles she had created. She felt herself slipping, the thin line between consciousness and oblivion stretching, fraying. Protect them. And this envelope, she whispered to the nurse, voice barely audible, deliberate, imbued with a weight that would outlast her. She pressed the small, folded paper into the nurse's hand, the tip of her fingers brushing the warmth of new life. The nurse's eyes widened slightly, understanding immediately that this was more than a message. This was a command, a secret, a will of iron hidden within fragile skin. Sienna's head tilted back against the hospital pillow. Her body trembled, fatigue and relief mingling. She felt the tiny hands of the triplets against her chest, fragile and trusting. And then darkness claimed her. Her last sight was the swirl of white ceiling tiles, the harsh glare of lights softened by tears she had not shed, and the soft murmur of the nurse, promising silently, reverently, to uphold her instructions. Sterling's voice echoed distantly in her mind, a shadow of a sound, arrogant, oblivious, as if he had some claim over the miracle unfolding. Sloane's laugh was there too, cruel and light, completely unaware of the weight of what had just occurred. They thought this was a victory, a payday, a moment they controlled. They had no idea. Sienna's breath slowed, then faltered. She imagined the future of the triplets, the life she had already begun to shape for them in her mind, a fortress built of intention, patience, and foresight. She would not be there in body, but she would be there in strategy, in the careful plotting of the future, in the inheritance of their strength. The nurse's hand gripped hers, steady, warm, affirming. Sienna's eyes closed fully, the last spark of her conscious mind holding one thought, one unbreakable vow. No one will touch them. No one will take what is mine to protect. Machines beeped in rhythm, a harsh, clinical counterpoint to the tiny cries of life. Each breath was a surrender, each heartbeat a triumph, each tear, unshed, a declaration of intent. The nurse moved quickly, carefully, adjusting the blankets, checking vitals, whispering reassurances. She noticed the envelope, tucked under the pillow, and knew instinctively that it contained more than instructions. It contained truth, power, a blueprint of the mother's will, her revenge, her legacy. The triplets' cries filled the room, growing louder, insistent, demanding attention. And yet the quiet in the room was thicker than ever, a heavy shadow that hung over the miracle of life. Sienna had given them the world she could not claim for herself, and in doing so had set the stage for a confrontation that no one yet imagined. Sterling would arrive, Sloane would arrive, and the world would assume it was theirs to command. But Sienna had already won. Her plan was already in motion. The hospital hallway was empty now, save for the soft hum of lights and the distant echo of footsteps that were not hers. The envelope, fragile yet potent, waited quietly in the nurse's hand. Every secret contained within it was a weapon, a shield, and a promise, all at once. And as the nurse glanced down at the sleeping triplets, wrapped in blankets too soft for the harshness of the world outside, a shadow fell across the door. A figure paused there, movement hesitant but deliberate, and the nurse instinctively stiffened. Something, or someone, was about to cross the threshold, something that would change everything, though the triplets were still too small to understand it. Sienna's presence lingered in the room, quiet but absolute, a force that had not yet left. Her spirit, her planning, her foresight, it all hovered, watching, waiting, protecting. And then the door opened fully, creaking slightly on its hinges. A figure stepped in, framed by the early morning light, face hidden in shadow. The nurse's grip tightened on the envelope. The triplets stirred, sensing the shift in energy, tiny fists curling instinctively. A quiet, tense pause hung in the room. Time itself seemed to slow. The figure in the doorway remained still, yet their presence radiated authority and intent. The nurse realized in a heartbeat, this was no ordinary visitor. And in the seconds before the figure moved forward, she knew one undeniable truth. The arrival of this person would alter the destiny of the triplets forever. The morning after the birth was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that presses against the chest and makes every sound outside feel distant. The triplets slept in the nursery, wrapped in soft blankets that smelled faintly of powder and new life. Their tiny chests rose and fell in perfect rhythm, ignorant of the storm that had already begun brewing outside their room. Sloane moved through Sienna's bedroom with practiced precision, each step deliberate, almost ritualistic. She lifted a painting from the wall and inspected it for only a second before tossing it toward the corner of the room. Canvas after canvas followed, scattered across the floor, torn from the life of a woman who had dared to exist in strength and vision. The smell of paint and turpentine mixed with the sterile scent of the hospital sheets that Sloane had delivered from Sienna's home. Everything smelled like dominance. Sterling leaned against the doorway, champagne flute in hand, smirk firmly planted across his face. He allowed himself a slow, measured sip, savoring the imagined victory. All of it, he murmured, almost to himself, almost reverently. All of it will be mine. His gaze swept the room, landing briefly on the scattered artwork before returning to the doorway where Sloane now posed, triumph in her posture and cruelty in her smile. Soon, he said, the bank will release the funds, every last cent of her inheritance. You and I, Sloane, nothing can touch us now. Sloane's smile, however, wavered ever so slightly, as if an unseen shadow had brushed across the edges of her consciousness. She ignored it at first, blaming fatigue, her hunger for victory, the anticipation of luxury and power. But the envelope on the nightstand, the one the nurse had handed her without comment, kept tugging at the corner of her mind. She bent slightly to pick it up, turning it over in her fingers. The seal was simple, unassuming, yet heavy with intention. Probably just trash, she muttered, tossing it aside. Yet even as she did, a cold prickle ran down her spine. Something in her gut whispered that it was not trash, that it mattered more than any amount of money, more than any image she had constructed for herself in the mirrors of ambition. She pushed the thought away, focusing instead on the nursery and the sleeping triplets. Their innocence mocked her. Their peace was hers to inherit, or so she believed. Sterling laughed lightly, the sound hollow, echoing through the empty halls of the mansion like a fading shadow. "Call the lawyer tomorrow," he said. "We'll run the DNA test, just to be thorough. No surprises, no questions. It's all guaranteed." His arrogance dripped from every syllable, a coating of security that came from a man who had never faced real loss or consequence. The evening crept in, and the mansion seemed to breathe. Creaks of floorboards, distant wind through the blinds, whispers of memory lingering in corners where Sienna had once stood. The staff moved about quietly, careful not to disturb the new occupants. The triplets, or the fragile veneer of Victory, Sloane and Sterling, were trying desperately to maintain. Sloane walked to the window, peering down at the garden that Sienna had tended with painstaking care. Every flower, every trimmed hedge had been a reflection of the woman's patience and precision. A small pang of recognition flickered in her chest, quickly suppressed. She turned away, unwilling to honor that strength with acknowledgement. Sienna had been clever. Sloane knew it, even if she refused to admit it aloud. Sterling's hand brushed hers briefly, a casual touch, and Sloane felt a jolt, not of attraction, but of fear. Fear that the power they thought they possessed might be illusory, fragile as glass under too much weight. Sterling did not notice, of course. He had never noticed anything but his reflection in the mirror, and he certainly would not notice the tension coiling beneath Sloane's skin. The triplets shifted in their sleep. One let out a small, indignant cry, but the sound was drowned out by Sterling's laughter and the pop of another cork from the champagne bottle. He toasted again, holding up the glass towards Sloane, as if the two of them were immortal, untouchable. "To us," he said. "To the future. Everything we ever wanted is finally ours." But the envelope lingered in the back of Sloane's mind. She had glanced at it again, curiosity gnawing despite herself. She had no idea what secrets it contained, who it was meant for, or why the nurse had entrusted it so carefully. And yet, there was weight in its existence, a quiet insistence that it mattered. Sterling ignored the faint sense of foreboding, brushing past it as easily as he had brushed past Sienna's feelings for years. He was a man who believed the world bent to his will, a man who thought cunning and cruelty were equivalent to intelligence. He did not know patience. He did not know foresight. He did not know that even silence could be a weapon more lethal than any blade. Night fell, the mansion darkening except for the warm glow of the chandelier above the grand staircase. Shadows stretched across the walls, lengthening and curling like living things. Sloane walked through the bedroom again, scanning for anything that might be worth keeping, anything that might hold value beyond money. Her hands brushed over the remnants of Sienna's life. Journals, sketches, letters she did not understand, memories she could not comprehend. Each item she touched seemed to whisper secrets she was not ready to hear. Sterling sat in the armchair by the window, eyes on the city lights beyond, imagining wealth, control, dominance. The world belonged to him in this moment, he believed, as Sloane moved about the room, a shadow of grace and ambition. And yet, neither of them noticed the subtle signs of something shifting, a presence they had never accounted for, the residue of Sienna's planning, her strategy, her foresight. The nurse watched quietly from the doorway, her hand resting lightly on the envelope she had promised to protect. Her eyes flicked to the sleeping triplets, to the smug, overconfident figures who thought they controlled everything, and she felt the first flicker of unease. Something about the night, about the mansion, about the weight of Sienna's absence, was wrong. It was too still, too precise, too much like a trap. A soft wind rattled the windows, and for a moment the champagne glasses on the counter vibrated lightly. Sloane paused, heart skipping a beat, dismissing it as coincidence. Sterling did not notice. He was too busy imagining the fortune, the lifestyle, the empire that was already his, or so he thought. The nursery remained quiet. The triplets moved slightly in their sleep, tiny limbs curling instinctively, sensing, perhaps, the tension in the room. Their innocence was untouched, but the nurse knew it could not remain so for long. There were currents in motion they could not see, forces gathering silently, deliberately, just out of reach. Sloane returned to the envelope once more, curiosity gnawing at her defenses. The seal was simple, but her instincts screamed that this was not ordinary correspondence. Something about it carried authority, even power. She placed it back on the nightstand, telling herself it was nothing, that it did not matter, that the victory was hers. But the air in the mansion shifted as the night deepened. Shadows moved in corners that should have been empty. The lights flickered briefly, a staccato reminder that nothing here was permanent, nothing guaranteed. Even the walls seemed to listen, to wait, to hold secrets that would not yet reveal themselves. Sterling's laughter echoed again, louder, more confident, but hollow. He toasted once more, glasses raised high, smiling at Sloane with smug certainty. "Everything we dreamed of," he said, "everything is ours, forever." And yet the envelope remained, unnoticed except by the nurse, who felt the weight of its contents as though it were a living thing, a pulse of quiet power, a reminder that victory could be temporary, fragile, and illusionary. Sloane finally moved toward the nursery to check on the triplets, and in that moment a subtle shift occurred in the air, almost imperceptible, a quiet reminder that the story was far from over. Something was coming, something that would unravel the carefully constructed world of Sloane and Sterling, and the mansion seemed to hold its breath in anticipation. The nurse's hand hovered over the envelope, her eyes flicking toward the door as a faint sound echoed from the hallway. Footsteps, soft, measured, almost too precise to belong to anyone ordinary. Sloane and Sterling did not hear it. They were too busy with champagne, too busy with imagined victory, too blind to the undercurrent of reality pressing in from the edges of the mansion. The wind howled briefly outside, rattling the windows, and the lights flickered again. Shadows stretched unnaturally long across the bedroom, the nursery, the hallways. The nurse's eyes widened as the envelope shifted slightly beneath her fingers, as if it were responding to something, someone approaching. A figure appeared at the far end of the hall, tall, deliberate, silent. Presence alone demanded attention, yet Sloane and Sterling remained oblivious, engrossed in their celebration. The nurse's hand tightened on the envelope. A chill ran through the room. The triplets stirred, sensing something beyond comprehension, something imminent. Time seemed to slow. The mansion itself felt alive, listening, waiting. The figure stepped forward, and every instinct in the nurse's body screamed that this was no ordinary visitor. Authority, purpose, and intent radiated from them in a way that made even the confident Sloane uneasy. The footsteps drew closer. Every creak, every tap, every shift in air carried the weight of inevitability. The air tightened, hearts unknowingly holding their breath. And just as the figure reached the threshold of the nursery, the lights went out entirely, plunging the room into darkness, save for the faint glow of moonlight through the windows. Sloane froze mid-step, Sterling's hand gripping the counter for balance. In the moonlight, the nurse could just make out the silhouette of the figure, immovable, silent, commanding. The envelope pressed tightly to her chest felt heavier than ever. Whatever or whoever had entered the mansion was no ordinary visitor. And in that suspended, tense silence, she realized the victory they celebrated was about to shatter completely. The mansion felt unusually still that morning, as if the walls themselves had sensed the approaching storm. Sterling's confident stride through the grand hallway was sharp, deliberate, a man who believed every corner of his world was under his command. Champagne in hand, he had already imagined the check, the fortune, the absolute victory that awaited him. The doorbell rang, precise and abrupt, echoing through the corridors like an omen. Sterling's brow furrowed slightly, though he forced a smirk. "Henderson," he muttered, recognizing the punctuality of his lawyer, the man who never missed a step, never wasted a minute. The door opened, and Mr. Henderson entered, calm, deliberate, papers neatly stacked in his hand. He removed his coat, draped it over his arm, and for a moment simply observed the room, the grandeur, the opulence, and the smug confidence radiating from Sterling. He did not comment, did not smile. His presence alone shifted the energy, a subtle warning that today was not a day for arrogance. Sterling's hand immediately went to the envelope, eager, certain that it contained nothing more than formalities to cement his claim. His lips curled in a triumphant smile as he reached for it, envisioning the bank's approval, the flow of money, the life he'd always thought guaranteed. "Mr. Sterling," Henderson said, voice calm, almost clinical. But the stillness in it carried weight. "The DNA results are in." Sterling froze mid-motion, his hand hovering over the papers. Something in the lawyer's tone, so measured, so deliberate, sent a flicker of unease down his spine. "And," he asked, attempting control, attempting certainty, "you are not related to these children," Henderson continued, letting each word hang in the air, heavy, sharp, irrevocable. Time. Fractured. The sound of champagne glasses clinking ceased entirely in Sterling's mind. His chest tightened, his jaw locked. He blinked once, twice, as if the words had been whispered incorrectly. Sloane, standing nearby, barely registered the first syllables before her grip on the flute faltered. Champagne spilled, warm liquid rolling across the marble floor, breaking into shards of glass that mirrored the sudden shattering of her imagined triumph. Her smile faltered, her posture stiffened. Something in the room had shifted, though she did not yet understand what. Sterling's face twisted, disbelief clawing at every feature. "Impossible!" he bellowed, pacing like a predator cornered by circumstance rather than prey. She cheated. She lied to me." His voice reverberated against the high ceilings, sharp and wild, echoing through the mansion as if the very walls were judging him. Henderson remained calm, steady, unflinching. "Check the letter," he said simply, handing Sterling a sealed envelope. The paper was heavy, pristine, marked with Sienna's careful, deliberate handwriting. There was a finality in the way she had addressed it. Purpose, thought, strategy. Sterling tore open the envelope hastily, tearing the edges with impatience and fury. He unfolded the letter, eyes scanning the words with mounting disbelief, confusion, and raw, untempered rage. Every sentence felt like a blow, each word a carefully aimed strike. The revelation hit with crushing clarity. Sienna had known of his vasectomy years ago, a secret he had guarded jealously to manipulate and control her. He had believed every moment, every smile, every act had been submission, compliance, obedience, and yet she had been plotting, calculating, ensuring that he would never truly claim what he thought was his. She had chosen a donor, Cyrus Vance, a man whose character, integrity, and resources were everything Sterling was not. A man capable of giving the triplets a life free from manipulation, free from greed, free from the cruelty Sterling had assumed was his birthright to inflict. The irony, sharp and bitter, tore through Sterling's mind. He had believed in control, in dominion, in entitlement. But control was an illusion, a mirage that had evaporated the moment Sienna had acted with foresight, courage, and intelligence far beyond his understanding. Sloane's breathing became shallow, her eyes scanning the letter over Sterling's shoulder. The words, though not addressed to her, carried a weight that settled over the room like fog. Her triumph, so long imagined, now seemed fragile, ephemeral, built on sand instead of stone. Sterling's hands shook as he held the paper, rage and disbelief battling with confusion. His entire life had been predicated on assumptions that Sienna was compliant, that his children were secure, that his inheritance would be absolute. And now, in a single stroke, every certainty had been obliterated. Henderson's voice, quiet and measured, cut through the tension. "Mr. Sterling, it is clear that these children are not yours by blood. Legally, morally, and in every other way, they belong to the donor. The inheritance clause applies to biological relation." Sterling's vision blurred, his mind spinning with a maelstrom of rage, betrayal, and shame. How? His voice faltered, the arrogance that had always shielded him stripped away to reveal the raw, vulnerable core beneath. Sloane's lips parted, her mind racing, realizing she had been caught in a web she did not see being woven. The victory she had imagined, the mansion, the fortune, the prestige, was no longer guaranteed. A seed of doubt, tiny but insistent, had planted itself in her consciousness. The room fell into silence, broken only by the faint hum of the mansion, the distant whir of the city outside, and the subtle, persistent cries of the triplets from their nursery. Life continued, indifferent to the unraveling of human arrogance. Sterling sank into the nearest chair, the envelope clutched in his hand like a weapon and a curse at the same time. He could not comprehend how Sienna had foreseen his deception, his manipulation, and his greed. Every plan he had ever made, every assumption he had ever relied upon, seemed insignificant now. Sloane stepped closer, attempting to assert control, to reassure herself that she could salvage the situation. "There must be some mistake," she said softly, almost pleading. "The results, they're wrong. They have to be wrong." Henderson shook his head slowly. "There is no mistake, Mrs. Sloane. The test was conclusive. Mr. Sterling has no biological relation to the children. The donor is verified. The weight of the revelation pressed down, invisible yet tangible, suffocating in its inevitability." Sterling's breathing was ragged, uneven, a man unprepared for the consequences of choices he had thought inconsequential. He looked at the envelope again, hands trembling. Inside, Sienna's words were precise, deliberate, and unyielding. She had planned every detail, accounted for every contingency, protected her children from the man who had thought he owned them by default. Sloane's confidence eroded with every passing second. She realized that the power she had assumed over Sterling, over the mansion, over the children, was nothing but a fragile illusion. Sterling, for all his arrogance, was now a man exposed, vulnerable, stripped of authority he had never earned. The triplets cried from the nursery, small, insistent, unknowing of the human chaos surrounding them, and yet the cries seemed to echo Sienna's foresight, a subtle reminder that life persisted, resilient and defiant. Sterling's gaze hardened, a spark of rage igniting once more, but it was different now. Tempered by disbelief, confused by the depth of Sienna's planning. He was cornered, exposed, powerless in the face of a reality he could not manipulate. Sloane's eyes darted around the room, looking for a solution, a loophole, a way to reclaim what had already slipped beyond her reach. But the envelope remained untouched by anyone but the nurse, a symbol of Sienna's victory. Quiet, but absolute. Henderson's presence was calm, unshakable. He had seen the aftermath of betrayal and deceit before, but even he could feel the tension, the charged energy, the weight of inevitability pressing down like a physical force. The mansion itself seemed to hum with awareness, every shadow, every flicker of light, every creaking floorboard conspiring to remind those present that nothing would ever be the same. Sterling rose, hand shaking, voice low but seething. This isn't over," he growled, though even he could hear the hollow echo of his own words. Sloane did not respond, though her mind raced. The champagne had long been forgotten. The laughter disappeared. All that remained was the quiet, suffocating certainty that the game had shifted, and she was not in control. From the doorway, the nurse's hand rested lightly on the envelope, knowing its contents held not just instructions, but the foundation of the life Sienna had fought to protect. Every instinct screamed that the next moments would define everything. The future of the triplets, the downfall of Sterling, the consequences of choices made long before this morning. The triplets stirred again, sensing tension they could not understand. Tiny fingers curled instinctively, their soft cries piercing the tense silence. Sterling's breathing grew heavier, uneven. His mind raced, trying to comprehend the impossible, trying to find leverage where there was none. Sloane's skin felt cold, her pulse racing, her assumptions evaporating in real time. Every glance at the envelope, every whispered word from Henderson, every tiny sound from the nursery reinforced the truth they could no longer deny. Sienna had won, and they were left with nothing but shattered arrogance and the stark realization that power had been an illusion. The mansion seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the next move, the inevitable confrontation that would expose secrets, greed, and consequences in equal measure. Sterling's hands shook as he finally spoke, voice barely above a whisper, laced with disbelief and rage. Why would she do this? How could she? Henderson merely shook his head, silent, letting the weight of the truth sink in. Sloane stepped back, chest tight, heart hammering. For the first time she felt fear, not for herself alone, but for the world she had thought she controlled. And outside the nursery, the soft cries of the triplets continued, small but insistent, unaware that they were the center of a storm far larger than themselves. Sterling's eyes narrowed at the envelope, rage and disbelief warring in his gaze. Sloane trembled, realizing victory had slipped through her fingers. The nurse's hand tightened around the paper, knowing its contents could change everything in a single moment. And then the mansion doors creaked open, slow, deliberate, and a shadowed figure appeared, their presence undeniable. Everyone froze, sensing that the next revelation would shatter what remained of the fragile control Sterling and Sloane clung to. The mansion seemed to hold its breath. Sterling's hand lingered over the envelope, as though touching it could reverse reality. His knuckles whitened, his chest heaving with disbelief and rage. The words of Sienna's letter pressed into his mind like iron bars, each sentence carefully designed to dismantle everything he thought he owned, everything he thought he was. Sloane stood beside him, frozen, her triumph evaporating before her eyes. The glittering jewelry she had so proudly displayed seemed meaningless, hollow, as though it were a mask she no longer needed, or could no longer rely on. She had thought herself powerful, untouchable, a co-conspirator in Sterling's rise, but the letter revealed a truth that left her cold. She had celebrated a victory that had never been hers to claim. Sterling's empire of arrogance, the carefully constructed illusion of wealth and control, began to crumble. Every confident plan, every assertion of dominance, every casual manipulation he had relied upon seemed insignificant in the face of Sienna's foresight. He had underestimated her, misjudged her strength, assumed she was fragile, compliant, predictable, and now all of it lay in ruins. The nurse watched silently, her hand resting lightly on the envelope. She had delivered Sienna's message with quiet reverence, knowing its power, understanding that every word could shift the trajectory of lives, fortunes, and futures. She sensed the storm brewing in Sterling's mind, the panic rippling just beneath his rage, a man unaccustomed to being outmaneuvered. Sloane's gaze returned to the letter. Her fingers trembled as she traced the words, the precise, deliberate script of a woman who had lived a life in shadows, yet always thought 10 steps ahead. The letter revealed that Sienna had not only anticipated Sterling's greed, but had actively countered it, orchestrating a plan that ensured her children would never inherit his cruelty. "I could not let greed poison their blood," the letter read. "I chose a father worthy of their future." Cyrus Vance. The name struck Sloane like a physical blow. unknown, unseen, a man of wealth, of influence, of integrity. A protector who had been quietly present in Sienna's life for years, buying her paintings anonymously, ensuring she had independence she never dared dream of. Sloane's stomach churned as realization dawned. The victory she had assumed was never real. She had celebrated someone else's plan, never hers. Sterling's voice broke through the silence, a raw, guttural sound Sloane had never heard before. How could she outsmart me? His words trembled, on the edge of disbelief, vulnerability cracking the facade of the man who had never admitted weakness. He could not comprehend it, could not accept that Sienna had anticipated every move, every manipulation, every cruelty he had deployed against her. The house seemed to shiver, as though the walls themselves felt the weight of Sienna's silent revenge. The chandeliers swayed slightly with the subtle vibrations, and the distant hum of the city outside felt muted, as if time itself had paused to bear witness. Every surface, every shadow seemed to whisper her presence, a reminder that though she was gone, her strategy, her foresight, her intelligence still ruled the mansion. Sloane's hands clenched at her sides, the glittering jewelry she had prized moments ago now irrelevant. She realized too late that she had been dancing on a stage scripted entirely by Sienna. Every step she had taken, every boast she had made, every plan she had celebrated was part of a carefully designed trap. She had been a pawn in a game she never understood. Sterling's eyes darted around the room, searching for something, anything that could restore his sense of control. He wanted to destroy the letter, to erase the truth, to reclaim dominance by force or intimidation. But the words had already seeped into every corner of the room, into every thought, into every pulse of the mansion itself. They were irreversible. The triplets slept in their nursery, blissfully unaware of the upheaval, the chaos, the revelations that had shaken the adults who believed they could control fate. Their cries, soft and insistent, were a reminder of life's persistence, of innocence untouched by greed, ambition, or betrayal. Yet even their tiny presence carried power, the weight of potential, a force Sterling and Sloane could neither manipulate nor ignore. Henderson, ever calm, remained a silent observer. He had handled disputes, battles over inheritance, legal maneuverings before, but he had never witnessed a revelation with such deliberate precision, such elegance in planning, such emotional weight. He watched Sterling's collapse, Sloane's panic, and the quiet authority of the triplets' nursery, and he knew the balance had irrevocably shifted. Sterling's shoulders slumped, his hands trembling. She played me, he whispered more to himself than anyone else. She anticipated everything, everything I would do. Rage burned in his chest. But it was mixed with awe he could not admit, fear he could not articulate. Sloane's breathing was shallow. Her mind raced, replaying the moments she had assumed victory. The champagne toast, the scattered paintings, the false celebration of dominance, and now everything felt like ashes in her hands. She had misread the situation entirely, misjudged the woman she had mocked, underestimated the depth of her strategy. The mansion itself seemed to respond. The shadows lengthened across the walls, creeping toward the figures in the room. The chandeliers glimmered faintly, as if reflecting the subtle shift in power. Every floorboard, every echo of movement seemed to emphasize the absolute control Sienna had maintained even in absence. Sterling's voice grew hoarse, each word punctuated with disbelief. All these years, I thought I controlled everything. I thought I knew her. I thought I knew the future. And she outmaneuvered me without even being here. The nurse's hand rested lightly on the envelope. She had kept it safe, understanding its value, aware that Sienna's planning extended beyond life, beyond death, beyond the simple inheritance that Sterling had so arrogantly assumed. It was more than instructions. It was strategy, legacy, and revenge woven into one. Sloane finally looked up from the letter, eyes meeting Sterling's. For the first time, there was no partnership, no alliance, no shared triumph. There was only the shared realization of defeat, humiliation, and the futility of greed when confronted with foresight and integrity. The triplets stirred slightly in their sleep, tiny fists curling instinctively, their fragile presence a subtle reminder that Sienna's planning was complete. Her children were protected, their future secured, and neither Sterling nor Sloane could touch it. Sterling's fists clenched at his sides. He had built his life on arrogance, on manipulation, on assuming control over everything and everyone. And now, stripped of certainty, stripped of dominance, stripped of the illusion of power, he felt a hollowness he had never known. Sloane's lips trembled, though she tried to maintain composure. The jewelry, the mansion, the imagined fortune, all meaningless. The triplets, the letter, the unseen hand of Cyrus Vance. They had rendered her plans irrelevant. Henderson finally spoke, voice quiet but commanding. The inheritance and guardianship are not up for negotiation. The donor has been verified, and the instructions left by Sienna are legally binding. There is nothing you can do. Sterling's knees buckled slightly, the first crack in the man who had always stood as an unyielding force. No, this can't be. Sloane's breath caught in her throat. She planned all of this? She whispered, realization breaking over her like a wave. She planned every step, every detail, and we... Yes, Henderson confirmed, calm, unflinching. You were never in control. She never let you be. The house seemed to hum around them, as if affirming the truth of Henderson's words. The chandeliers swayed slightly, the walls whispered faintly, and the air was thick with tension and inevitability. Sterling's voice cracked, raw and vulnerable. Disbelief mingled with a rage he could not direct. I thought I could... The envelope shifted slightly in the nurse's hands. She knew that the time for patience was nearing its end, that the revelation Sienna had orchestrated was about to escalate further. The triplets' cries became insistent, tiny but commanding, as though sensing the tension, the pending arrival of a force they had never met. Sloane's pulse pounded in her ears. For the first time she felt fear, not just for her plans, but for the control she had never truly possessed. Sterling's glare moved to the nursery, to the fragile lives he had assumed he could dominate, and he realized with a growing chill that the world had shifted. He was powerless, and then, from the threshold of the room, a figure stepped forward, tall, deliberate, commanding, exuding presence in a way that filled every corner with unspoken authority. The nurse's grip tightened on the envelope. She could feel the weight of destiny pressing through the room, unyielding and absolute. Sloane gasped, Sterling froze, and the triplets stirred, tiny limbs moving instinctively, as if recognizing the presence of someone who would redefine everything. The figure paused, just inside the doorway, and silence fell over the mansion, thick, suffocating, and full of inevitability. Cyrus Vance revealed himself for the first time, his gaze sweeping the room with quiet authority. The triplets' future, Sloane's crumbling ambitions, Sterling's unraveling empire, all now hinged on this single presence. And in that moment, everyone realized nothing would ever be the same again. The heavy front doors of the mansion swung open with a measured authority, the sound echoing through the marble halls like a bell tolling justice. Cyrus Vance stepped through, tall, composed, his presence commanding without the need for aggression. Behind him, a cadre of high-profile lawyers followed silently, the sound of their polished shoes barely a whisper against the marble. The room seemed to contract under the weight of his presence, as though the walls themselves recognized authority. Sterling's champagne glass trembled in his hand. He blinked, trying to reconcile the man standing before him with the rumors he had vaguely heard, the name that Sienna had carefully tucked into her plan. Every instinct he had honed over decades, arrogance, manipulation, control, faltered in the presence of Cyrus. This was not a man to be bargained with. This was someone with patience, with foresight, with integrity and power combined. Sloane, ever the social predator, stepped slightly in front of Sterling, a fragile shield of false confidence around her. Her jewelry caught the light of the chandelier, but even its sparkle could not mask the tremor in her hand, the subtle tightening of her jaw, the flicker of doubt in her eyes. For the first time, she felt real fear, a fear not born of threat, but born of inevitability. She had miscalculated, and she knew it. "I've come for what belongs to the children," Cyrus said, his voice calm, steady, deliberate. Each word carried weight, each syllable landing with the inevitability of law and principle. His gaze swept over Sterling and Sloane, a quiet disdain in his expression, sharp but not cruel. He did not raise his voice, he did not need to. Authority radiated from him, rendering words of arrogance, threats, and intimidation irrelevant. Sterling's confident posture faltered. His hands, which had gripped the champagne glass so tightly, loosened, shaking slightly as he realized that the life he had constructed on manipulation, deceit, and assumed dominance was unraveling before him. The mansion, once a testament to his wealth and control, suddenly felt alien, hollow, almost hostile. Sloane's eyes flicked nervously to the Triplets' nursery, where the 3 infants slept in perfect innocence, completely unaware of the human chaos unfolding around them. Her mind raced, calculating options, possibilities, escapes, but there were none. Every avenue she had assumed was open had been closed, blocked by the precision of Sienna's planning and Cyrus's presence. Cyrus moved forward, each step deliberate, measured. The air around him seemed to shift, tightening, compressing, filled with an unspoken assertion of justice. He did not speak again, immediately. His attention rested on the Triplets' nursery, where soft cries and tiny movements testified to life, hope, and the deliberate foresight of their mother. Sterling finally broke the silence, voice strained, incredulous. Who are you two?" His words faltered mid-sentence. Authority, integrity, and foresight were not things he had reckoned with. In Cyrus, he recognized a force beyond manipulation, beyond deception, beyond the reach of money and entitlement. Cyrus's gaze met Sterling's for a brief, unyielding moment. "I am here to ensure that Sienna's wishes are honored, that her children are protected, that her foresight is not undone by greed or arrogance." Sloane's confidence cracked. She had counted on Sterling's control, on the certainty of his plans, on the assumption that the inheritance, the mansion, the empire could be claimed through manipulation. All of it was gone. She could see the truth now. Her alliance had been with a man whose fortune was illusory, a man whose life was built on borrowed power. The lawyers moved into position silently, a living testament to Cyrus's authority. Every document, every contract, every contingency had been anticipated. They represented a system designed to enforce Sienna's plan, to ensure that the Triplets' future could not be touched by greed, ambition, or malice. Sterling slumped against the nearest wall, realization sinking in. The years of manipulation, the lies, the threats, the arrogance, it all meant nothing. Sloane, his closest confidant in ambition, his co-conspirator, had celebrated a victory that was never hers. She had built a fragile alliance on false assumptions, and now both of them stood powerless. The nursery doors creaked softly as Cyrus approached. His hand rested lightly on the handle, deliberate, respectful. The triplets stirred, tiny fingers curling instinctively. They sensed, perhaps, a calm authority, a presence aligned with protection, with honor, with the future their mother had fought to secure. Sterling's gaze followed every step, rage and disbelief mixing in his expression. She outsmarted me at every turn, he muttered, voice hoarse. How could she? Sloane's lips trembled, unable to form words. Every plan she had imagined, every calculated move, every illusion of control had been rendered meaningless. The triplets were safe, and she had no claim, no leverage, no authority. Her ambition had been a theatre. She had been an actor without a script, and Cyrus had entered as the director of destiny. The lawyers stepped forward, presenting documents verifying Cyrus's guardianship, the legal authority granted to him by Sienna's careful planning. Every clause, every sentence, every notarized signature reinforced the unassailable truth. The triplets belonged to Cyrus Vance, their protector, their guardian, their father, by Sienna's careful choice. The room felt smaller, more oppressive. Every breath Sterling took was a reminder of the failure he could not escape. Every glance Sloane gave was filled with panic, recognition, and a dawning awareness that the life she had imagined was gone. Cyrus did not raise his voice. He did not need to. His calm authority, his quiet strength, his unshakable presence filled every corner of the mansion. The chandeliers above seemed to glimmer with approval. The walls, the floors, the very air seemed aligned with him, bearing witness to the power of Sienna's foresight. Sterling's shoulders slumped completely. The man who had built a world on manipulation, on control, on greed, now recognized the futility of all he had pursued. The mansion no longer felt like his. The fortune no longer belonged to him. The children he thought he could claim were safe in the hands of a man he could neither manipulate nor intimidate. Sloane's breathing became shallow, uneven. She realized, too late, that she had tied her ambitions to a man who was bankrupt not just in fortune, but in foresight, in vision, in integrity. Every alliance she had counted on crumbled as Cyrus moved closer to the nursery, each step deliberate, full of authority that left no room for challenge. The triplets' tiny hands reached instinctively, curling around their blankets, their cries soft but insistent. Cyrus knelt, gentle and deliberate, his eyes meeting theirs with warmth, reassurance, and quiet authority. He did not rush. He did not force attention. He simply existed in alignment with the future Sienna had planned. Sterling's chest heaved with frustration, disbelief, and raw vulnerability. His empire, built on arrogance and deceit, had ended in a single moment. Sloane's plans, built on alliance and ambition, had collapsed just as quickly. Cyrus rose, carrying the triplets, with care, and for the first time, Sloane felt true fear. Not for herself, but for the truth she had ignored, for the authority she could never challenge, for the inevitability she had celebrated too late. The mansion seemed to exhale, the tension momentarily breaking as Cyrus's presence filled every corner with quiet dominance. The triplets' future, carefully plotted and protected, was now secured under his guardianship. Sterling's voice broke, raw and hoarse. "No, no! This can't be everything I built, all gone." Sloane's hands trembled at her sides. Her mind raced through every false assumption, every empty victory, every plan undone. The glittering jewelry she had prized moments ago now felt like ashes in her hands. Cyrus's gaze swept over them once more, calm but unyielding. Sienna's wishes are clear. The children are safe. Their future is protected. You have no claim, no authority, and no recourse. The lawyers stepped closer, their presence a silent enforcement of the unbreakable truth. Sterling and Sloane realized the magnitude of the defeat, the finality of the plan they had underestimated. The mansion itself seemed alive. Every floorboard, every echo, every shadow affirming the inevitability of Sienna's foresight. The chandeliers glimmered faintly, the curtains shifted with the wind, as though bearing witness to a victory beyond human arrogance. The triplets stirred again, tiny voices calling softly into the world, unaware of the chaos, yet somehow sensing the alignment of justice, foresight, and protection. Sloane's lips parted, but no words emerged. Fear, panic, and disbelief held her tongue hostage. She had assumed control, celebrated victory, and now faced absolute irrelevance. Sterling's fists clenched, shaking. He had never encountered a force he could not manipulate, a reality he could not bend, a person whose authority was absolute. Cyrus was that force. The nurse watched silently, envelope still in hand, a witness to the orchestration of destiny. Sienna's plan had succeeded beyond measure. Every move, every precaution, every calculated risk had ensured the triplets' safety and prosperity. Cyrus carried the triplets to the center of the nursery, placing them gently in a carefully prepared crib. He knelt beside them, adjusting blankets, smoothing tiny fingers, whispering soft reassurances that only a protector could offer. Sterling and Sloane exchanged a glance, a moment of wordless realization. They had been outmaneuvered, outplayed, and exposed in a way they could not recover from. The mansion hummed with quiet tension, acknowledging the shift in power, the conclusion of a long unseen strategy, and the undeniable presence of authority that no human abitum could overcome. Cyrus's eyes lifted, locking with Sterling's in quiet, unyielding authority. Everything she built, everything she protected, now belongs where it should, he said softly. And then a subtle knock echoed from the far end of the mansion, a signal that someone else, unseen, had arrived, someone who might challenge even Cyrus's control. Silence fell as all eyes turned, hearts pounding, realizing that Sienna's plan might still face one final, unexpected twist. The mansion held its breath. Cyrus Vance's calm authority radiated through the room, the triplets safe in his arms, yet that single knock from the far hallway sliced through the stillness like a knife. Every head turned toward the sound, hearts hammering in sudden, shared apprehension. Sterling's face contorted, disbelief and panic wrestling for dominance. He stepped forward, his voice shaky but attempting control. Sloane clutched at the edge of the marble counter, trying to maintain poise, but the tremor in her hands betrayed her fear. She had already lost everything she thought mattered: wealth, influence, control, and yet the knock hinted at something even beyond her comprehension. Cyrus set the triplets gently in the crib, his eyes never leaving the hallway. His posture was unyielding, calm, but the subtle tightening of his jaw suggested he was ready for whatever or whoever was coming. The lawyers flanked him, silent but prepared, their presence a shield of authority and legal force. A figure stepped into view, tall and deliberate, face partially obscured by the dim light. Every step carried confidence, yet a subtle edge of unpredictability that made Sterling freeze in place. Sloane gasped softly, recognizing immediately that this was not an ordinary visitor. "You weren't expecting me," the figure said, voice smooth, controlled, but with an undercurrent of power that made the room shift. Sterling's mouth opened, then closed, searching for words that could assert dominance. But no words came. Every instinct screamed retreat. Every plan he had relied upon had already crumbled. Sloane's mind raced, trying to calculate motives, alliances, possible threats, but nothing fit. She had assumed Cyrus's presence made her powerless. This figure suggested a new variable, one that could upend even the careful orchestration of Sienna's plan. Cyrus took a slow, measured step forward. "Identify yourself," he said evenly, authority unmistakable, though his eyes betrayed a hint of caution. The newcomer's smile was faint, enigmatic. "I am someone who knew Sienna's secret, long before she could act. Someone who ensured her children would be born into protection no matter what." Sterling staggered slightly, his arrogance faltering under the weight of revelation. What? What do you mean? His voice cracked, vulnerable, desperate. Sloane's lips parted. She whispered, almost to herself, Who is this? The figure's eyes glinted in the light. I was Sienna's silent ally, the one who ensured Cyrus would be in the right place at the right time, the one who made certain her children's inheritance, her plan, would survive every threat, even greed, even betrayal. Cyrus's gaze remained steady. Explain. His tone was calm, but the tension in the room suggested the weight of an unspoken history, a delicate chain of trust and foresight. The newcomer stepped closer, each movement deliberate. Sienna anticipated more than just Sterling's greed. She knew the world would try to claim what was hers. She prepared allies, unsung, unseen, people who would act when the time came. That time is now. Sterling swallowed hard, panic and disbelief clashing violently. I can't. She outsmarted everyone, he stammered, voice broken. Sloane backed against the counter, fear evident, the veneer of control stripped away. Why? Why would anyone help her? The figure's smile widened faintly. Because some debts are paid in loyalty. Some promises are fulfilled beyond life. Sienna's foresight wasn't just about survival. It was about justice. Every choice she made, every move she orchestrated, ensured that those who sought to harm her children would fail. Cyrus stepped closer, placing a hand lightly on the figure's shoulder. You've come to confirm what I already know. Yes, the newcomer replied, calm and unwavering. Her plan is in motion. Unbreakable. The triplets are protected. The inheritance cannot be claimed by those who lack foresight, integrity, or honor. Sterling's hands trembled. This is impossible. Everything I thought, gone, all gone. Sloane's jaw tightened, her mind racing. She had anticipated being outplayed by Cyrus, but the presence of this unseen ally, someone operating in shadows, someone whose strategy had remained hidden until now, suggested a new depth to Sienna's genius. The triplets stirred slightly, tiny hands moving instinctively, as if sensing the alignment of forces in the room. The sound of their soft cries seemed to underscore the absolute truth of Sienna's foresight. These children were protected, their future secure, even beyond the reach of those who sought to manipulate it. Sterling's chest heaved. Rage, disbelief, and desperation collided inside him. He had relied on manipulation, dominance, intimidation, but all of it had crumbled. Not just against Cyrus, but against the unseen ally, orchestrating events from behind the scenes. Sloane's hands trembled visibly now. Every ounce of ambition, every carefully calculated step, every fantasy of victory had been dismantled. She realized that she had underestimated Sienna's vision, not just in life, but beyond life. Cyrus's gaze swept the room once more, quiet authority radiating from him. The triplets are safe. Their mother planned for everything. Her foresight cannot be undone. The newcomer stepped back, nodding faintly. And anyone who challenges this will find that Sienna's influence reaches further than they imagine. Her plan is already in motion. Sterling sank into the nearest chair, a man unmoored, powerless, exposed. Every instinct he had relied upon had failed. Every threat, every assertion of control had been rendered meaningless. Sloane's lips parted, but no words came. Fear, panic, and the realization of total defeat left her speechless. Cyrus picked up the triplets gently, cradling them with care and authority. They will know their mother's courage, he said softly, almost to himself, but loud enough for all to hear. The mansion seemed to hum with approval, shadows lengthening, walls echoing faintly as though acknowledging the inevitability of Sienna's plan. Sterling's voice broke again, hoarse and desperate. No, she outwitted everyone. Everything I built, gone. Sloane's hands tightened at her sides. She realized that nothing, no alliance, no ambition, no wealth, could counter the silent, deliberate orchestration of Sienna's foresight. The newcomer's eyes glinted, calm but intense. Some plans survive beyond life, beyond greed, beyond the reach of men who think themselves clever. Sienna's plan is proof. Cyrus's grip on the triplets tightened protectively, eyes scanning the room with authority and care. Sterling and Sloane realized with growing horror that every move, every hope, every plan they had relied upon was meaningless in the face of Sienna's calculated foresight. The mansion fell silent once more, tension thick in every corner, the triplets' soft cries, the only reminder of life's persistence. The sound of soft footsteps echoed from the distant hallway. All eyes turned instinctively. Sterling's pulse raced. Sloane's breath caught. Even Cyrus's expression tightened slightly, a rare flicker of curiosity mixed with caution. The figure from the hallway paused, shadowed, deliberate. A presence that had not yet revealed its purpose or allegiance, yet carried undeniable weight. The shadowed figure stepped forward fully into the light, revealing a face that none of them expected, someone whose arrival could alter everything Cyrus had secured and whose motives remained a mystery. Sterling, Sloane, and even Cyrus froze, realizing that Sienna's plan, brilliant as it was, might still face one final, unforeseen test. The shadowed figure stepped fully into the light, revealing features sharp and calculating, eyes scanning the room with a subtle intensity that silenced even the air. Cyrus's grip on the triplets tightened, the faintest furrow forming on his brow. This was a presence that commanded attention, authority, and yet carried an unpredictability that even he had not accounted for. Sterling swallowed hard, his throat dry. His usual arrogance, his rehearsed threats, faltered completely. He knew instinctively that this person was not just another opportunist or social climber. This was someone with purpose, with intent, and possibly with power that could eclipse even Cyrus. Sloane's breath caught, fear evident in the way she clutched at the marble counter. She had assumed all threats were neutralized once Cyrus arrived. Now, the very air shifted, hinting at a new danger she could not calculate, a variable she had never considered. The newcomer's voice was calm, but with a timbre that resonated in the bones of everyone present. "I've come for answers," the figure said, "and to ensure that Sienna's legacy is fully honored." Cyrus's eyes narrowed slightly, assessing. "And what makes you think you have any authority here?" His voice carried measured calm, but every muscle in his body suggested readiness. "I've known Sienna longer than most realize," the figure replied. "I've watched her plan, her strategy, and her sacrifices. I've seen the threats she anticipated, the people she protected her children from, and I am here to ensure her foresight is enforced." Sterling's pulse raced. He had thought he was at the center of Sienna's world, the one controlling the narrative. Now, faced with this new arrival, he realized that he had underestimated the depth of her planning. Every move he made had been anticipated, not just by Cyrus but by someone else, someone invisible until this very moment. Sloane's jaw tightened. Every instinct screamed retreat, but she had no plan, no leverage, no understanding of the power this figure wielded. Every celebration she had held in the mansion now felt like mockery of her own arrogance. Cyrus finally spoke, a hint of curiosity in his tone. "Who exactly are you?" The figure smiled faintly, almost imperceptibly. "A guardian. Not in the way you understand it, Cyrus. I was chosen by Sienna to watch from the shadows, to act only when the moment required intervention. That moment has come." Sterling staggered back, voice shaking. You're helping her children?" Yes, the figure said, voice firm, because they deserve a life free from greed, free from manipulation. They deserve justice for the mother who gave everything for them, even her life. Sloane whispered under her breath, She planned this, all of it. The triplets stirred in their crib, tiny fists curling instinctively. Even in their innocence, there seemed to be recognition of the alignment of power and protection. The room felt charged, a delicate tension coiled tight like a spring waiting to release. Cyrus studied the figure, assessing every nuance. He had thought himself the final guardian, the protector of Sienna's vision. Now, the presence of another player complicated everything, yet also reinforced the inevitability of Sienna's plan. Sterling's shoulders slumped further. I can't... She outsmarted me at every turn, he muttered, the reality of total defeat sinking in. Sloane's eyes darted to Cyrus, then to the newcomer, searching desperately for any weakness, any clue, any chance. But there was none. Every movement, every word, every glance conveyed a control she could not challenge. The newcomer stepped closer, authority radiating from every motion. Cyrus is strong. Yes, but no one can execute Sienna's complete vision alone. That's why I am here. Cyrus nodded slightly, a flicker of acknowledgement in his eyes. Then we act together, he said, for the children, for Sienna. Sterling's rage and disbelief collided. I won't let this stand. His voice cracked, desperation leaking through his defenses. Sloane's hands shook. We can't fight this, she whispered, realization dawning. Her alliances had crumbled. Her ambition evaporated in the presence of Sienna's legacy and its protectors. The newcomer's smile was faint, resolute. Resistance is futile. Sienna prepared for every threat, every challenge, every deceit. Her plan is complete. Almost. The room fell into tense silence. Every breath weighted with anticipation. Even the mansion itself seemed to acknowledge the shift in power, the inevitability of Sienna's foresight, and the presence of someone whose arrival promised further revelation. Cyrus's gaze returned to the triplets, gentle and protective. Their future is secure, he said softly, voice firm yet tender. But the final piece, the truth that even Sterling cannot see, remains. Sterling's hands clenched into fists, desperation and panic colliding. He had imagined he could manipulate, control, intimidate. Now he faced a reality that stripped him of all power. Sloane's breathing was shallow, uneven. Every calculated move, every attempt at dominance, every assumption of victory had been dismantled. She understood now. Sienna's vision had layers even she could not fathom. The newcomer's eyes glimmered faintly, assessing the room, the occupants, the fragile power dynamics. There is one final act, the figure said, voice low, deliberate. One final step before Sienna's plan reaches its ultimate resolution. Cyrus's jaw tightened slightly, awareness flickering. And that is... The figure smiled faintly, enigmatic. That is something you will all witness very soon. But be warned. The next revelation will change everything you thought you knew about Sienna, the triplets, and the future she carved for them. The triplets stirred again, tiny cries cutting through the thick tension, reminding everyone present that life, innocence, and destiny were at stake. Sterling's chest heaved. Rage, fear, and hopelessness warred inside him. He realized finally that Sienna had not just outsmarted him, she had orchestrated a chain of events far beyond his imagination. Sloane's lips parted, but no words formed. Every fantasy of control, every imagined victory, every alliance, all meaningless in the face of Sienna's unseen guardian. Cyrus held the triplets closer, a protective shield around them. His gaze shifted to the newcomer, unspoken acknowledgement passing between them. Together, They would ensure the children's safety, uphold Sienna's plan, and navigate the challenges yet to come. The mansion seemed to hum with anticipation. Shadows lengthened, corners darkened, and every sound carried weight. The soft steps, the faint creak of floorboards, the tiny cries of the triplets, all signaling the presence of inevitability and the approach of the next revelation. Sterling and Sloane realized finally that Sienna's plan was not just brilliant, it was unassailable. Every challenge they could imagine had already been accounted for, already neutralized. And yet there was one more test they could not predict. The newcomer stepped forward, voice calm but firm. "Prepare yourselves. The final revelation is coming. It will change everything." The triplets' cries grew louder, insistent, as if sensing the tension in the room. Cyrus's protective stance tightened, eyes scanning every corner, ready for what was coming. Sterling's pulse raced. Sloane's face paled. The mansion, once a symbol of power and control, now felt like a cage, enclosing the inevitability of Sienna's design. And then, from the far hallway, another sound emerged, faint, deliberate, and unmistakable. Footsteps, slow, measured, heavy with intent. The footsteps echoed down the hallway, deliberate, unyielding. Every person in the room froze, their eyes following the slow, confident approach. Sterling's knuckles whitened as he gripped the edge of a table, realizing that control had completely slipped from his grasp. Sloane's face had drained of color. She had anticipated Cyrus, the legal team, even the unexpected ally, but she had not anticipated this. Whoever approached now carried authority, presence, and an aura that made the air feel heavy. The figure stepped into the light, a woman, tall, poised, eyes sharp and discerning. She moved with grace and precision, every step purposeful, every glance calculated. Even Cyrus's calm exterior shifted slightly as he recognized the depth of her presence. "Allow me to introduce myself," she said, voice smooth yet commanding. "I am Leora, Sienna's trusted executor beyond the law, the one who ensures her final wishes are fulfilled without question." Sterling's mouth opened, then closed. He tried to speak, but words failed him. This woman wasn't a threat he could manipulate. She wasn't vulnerable to intimidation. She was, unmistakably, in complete control of what he thought was lost, now reinforced. Sloane whispered under her breath, Her plan, it never ends." The truth hit her in waves. Every move she had celebrated was only part of a larger, orchestrated design. Every assumption of victory had been an illusion. Cyrus stepped slightly forward, protective yet deferential. "She is here for the children, for Sienna's legacy," he said calmly, yet with the weight of conviction behind his words. Leora's eyes swept the room, landing briefly on Sterling. "You have spent your life believing that wealth equals power, that manipulation equals control," she said. Her voice was not cruel, but it cut sharper than any blade. "You are bankrupt, not just in fortune, but in foresight, in integrity, in understanding what truly matters." Sterling's shoulders slumped, the finality settling into his bones. Rage and disbelief warred in his chest, but he could feel the walls closing around him, the reality of defeat undeniable. Sloane's hands trembled. She had once thought herself untouchable, clever, superior. Now she understood that every step, every decision, every perceived advantage had been accounted for by Sienna and her unseen guardians. Leora walked closer to the nursery, her gaze softening as she looked at the triplets. Tiny fingers curled, eyes fluttering open, innocence and trust shining through. "They are ready for the life their mother dreamed of for them," she whispered, almost to herself, though everyone could hear. Cyrus stepped closer, his presence protective, steady. Sienna ensured they would have every safeguard, every measure of security, and every chance to live free from the cruelty they would have faced, he said. The mansion seemed to vibrate with quiet authority, shadows deepening, walls echoing the weight of the truth now revealed. Sterling and Sloane were left staring at the reality they could no longer deny. Leora turned her eyes on Sterling again, calm and unflinching. "And you," she said, voice steady, "will answer for every action, every choice, every attempt to harm her children or her legacy. Your time of dominance is over." Sterling tried to find his voice, but it trembled. I built everything. His words broke, falling into the thick silence of the room. The truth of his impotence against Sienna's plan pressed down on him like iron. Sloane's lips moved, but no words formed. She realized now that every calculation, every ambition, every scheme she had counted on had failed utterly. Her arrogance had been shattered, her future stripped. Leora's attention shifted to Sloane. "And you, accomplice in arrogance, thought you could claim what was never yours. You underestimated the woman you tried to surpass, and now you face the consequence of that misjudgment." The triplets stirred again, soft cries filling the room. Cyrus stepped forward, gently placing his hand over theirs, offering reassurance. Their tiny lives had already been safeguarded, their mother's vision intact. Sterling's breath came in ragged bursts. Every instinct for control had been neutralized. Every scheme, every manipulation, every ounce of hubris, gone. The room held him captive in the reality he had refused to see. Sloane's face was pale, her mind spinning. Her alliances had been illusions, her victories false, her ambition meaningless. She understood finally. The true power had always been in Sienna's foresight. Leora's voice cut through the tension, calm and resolute. "Everything has been prepared, every threat anticipated, every challenge neutralized. The triplets' future, their inheritance, their safety, all secured. Nothing you do can alter this." Cyrus nodded, eyes on the infants. "Sienna's plan is complete. Every element accounted for. Every obstacle foreseen. Her children will never know the cruelty that Sterling once intended." Sterling sank lower, defeated, broken. Rage, despair, and helplessness collided in him. I can't. She outsmarted me. All of it." Sloane's lips pressed into a thin line. No excuses, no plots, no manipulations remained. She understood that the brilliance of Sienna's planning exceeded anything they could conceive. The room seemed to pulse with quiet inevitability. The mansion itself acknowledged the shift in power, the permanence of Sienna's vision, and the finality of the guardianship now in place. Leora stepped closer, her presence commanding and unwavering. "The final revelation you will witness," she said softly, "is the truth of Sienna's foresight, how every life in this house, every decision, every moment has been accounted for, even beyond her life." Sterling's chest heaved, disbelief and panic warring for dominance. Sloane's eyes darted between Cyrus and Leora, searching desperately for any weakness, any hint that the plan could be challenged, but found none. The triplets shifted in their crib, tiny hands moving instinctively as if sensing the presence of protection and authority surrounding them. Cyrus's eyes met Leora's briefly, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. The final step of Sienna's plan was ready to unfold, the culmination of every choice, every safeguard, every act of foresight. Sterling realized finally that the world he had tried to manipulate was no longer within his reach. Sloane understood her ambition had led her into irrelevance. And then Leora reached into her coat and produced a sealed envelope, identical in form to the one Sienna had given the nurse years ago. The room grew silent, anticipation crackling in the air. Leora's voice was calm, yet carried weight that made every heart in the room pause. "Inside this envelope lies the last secret Sienna entrusted to me. the final truth that will determine the future of her children and the fate of everyone who sought to challenge her. The envelope remained in her hand, pristine, deliberate, a symbol of the revelation yet to be unveiled. Every eye was fixed on her, breaths caught, hearts racing as the moment of ultimate revelation drew near. Leora's fingers brushed the seal of the envelope, slow, deliberate. Every eye in the room fixed on her, a tense silence, stretching like a living thing. Sterling's pulse raced, hope and fear colliding. Sloane's face paled, panic threatening to overtake the last vestiges of composure. Cyrus held the triplets close, their tiny bodies warm and alive, eyes blinking in innocence, unaware of the storm of revelations surrounding them. The weight of responsibility pressed upon him, yet he felt Sienna's presence in the room, calm, guiding, resolute. Leora broke the silence. Sienna's final instruction was simple yet profound. It is not just about inheritance or wealth. It is about justice, integrity, and the life she envisioned for her children. Sterling staggered back, anger and desperation coiling in him. I built everything. His voice cracked, but Leora's steady gaze cut through his self-righteousness like steel. You built nothing, she said firmly. You borrowed power, borrowed trust, borrowed a life that was never yours to command. Everything you believed you owned was orchestrated to fail under your arrogance. Sienna knew it. I know it. And now, so will everyone here. Sloane's knees shook. Her hands clenched at her sides, her dreams of wealth and influence crumbling to dust. But I thought I could... Your ambition blinded you, Cyrus interrupted softly, yet with quiet authority. Sienna planned for greed, for betrayal, for every attempt to manipulate her world. You underestimated her foresight, and now the truth is clear. Leora finally opened the envelope, her eyes scanning the contents briefly before she raised her head. Inside, she said, are the detailed instructions for the children's future, their inheritance, their guardianship, their education, and every safeguard against those who would harm them. Sienna thought of everything. Sterling's fists clenched at his sides. I can't. This is impossible. No, Leora said calmly. It is inevitable. Every choice you made to control, to cheat, to manipulate, it has failed. Sienna's vision cannot be broken. Sloane's voice was barely audible. She planned this from the very start. Yes, Leora said, her tone softening slightly as she glanced at the triplets. She protected them, ensured their life would be free from the shadows she endured. Her sacrifice was her strength, and her foresight their shield. Cyrus's gaze fell on Sterling. The life you thought you controlled is gone. Your power, your wealth, your influence, it was never your own. You cannot touch what was never yours. Sterling's chest heaved. Rage, despair, and helplessness collided inside him. I can't. You can't, Leora interrupted, finality in her voice. And now you must leave. The mansion, the fortune, the world Sienna built. It belongs to those who honor her legacy, not those who sought to exploit it. Sloane's lips pressed into a thin line. She looked at Cyrus, then Leora. Realization dawning. She had been part of a system she never controlled, and every step of arrogance had been met with careful orchestration by Sienna from beyond the grave. Cyrus stepped forward, carrying the triplets, their small fingers curling instinctively around his hands. They will know their mother's courage, he whispered, eyes glistening. They will know her strength, her love, and her vision. And they will never inherit the cruelty of the man who thought he could dominate their lives. Sterling slumped in defeat, every ounce of arrogance and entitlement drained from him. Sloane's ambition had turned to fear, and finally she understood her irrelevance. Leora turned to the triplets, her expression tender, resolute. These children will grow with the world Sienna designed for them. Every decision, every choice, every safeguard. They will never know what could have been, only what must be. Their lives are her final masterpiece. Cyrus held them close, feeling their warmth, their innocence, their promise. "We will honor her," he said softly, "in every choice, every moment, every day of their lives." Sterling tried one last time, voice low and trembling. I won't. I can't accept." "You have no choice," Leora said firmly. "Sienna's plan is complete. Every obstacle anticipated, every threat neutralized. Her legacy is absolute." Sloane's eyes filled with tears. She outsmarted us all." "Yes," Cyrus said softly. "And, in her brilliance, she gave life, hope, and justice to those who deserved it most." The mansion seemed to exhale, walls echoing the finality of Sienna's plan, shadows shifting, light spilling into corners that once felt oppressive. The triplets stirred gently, their tiny voices cutting through the tension, proof of life, innocence, and the mother's enduring love. Leora handed Cyrus the full set of instructions. Every moment, every detail, every safeguard. She left nothing to chance. The triplets' life is her last message, her final act of love and protection. Sterling finally sank fully into a chair, broken, powerless. Sloane turned and left the room, defeated, ambition stripped bare. Their world of manipulation had crumbled completely. Cyrus looked down at the triplets, cradling them with reverence. "They will grow knowing the truth," he whispered. "Their mother was fearless. Their life will reflect her courage." Leora nodded. "Her legacy is secure. And every choice, every safeguard, every act of protection will ensure that those who underestimated her never touch what she valued most." The room fell into a calm, profound silence. The chaos of greed, betrayal, and ambition had been replaced by justice, protection, and the enduring brilliance of a mother's love. The triplets cooed softly, tiny hands curling around Cyrus's fingers. Their innocence illuminated the room, a living testament to the sacrifices of the woman who had ensured their safety. Cyrus's eyes glistened with tears he did not try to hide. They will know her. They will grow strong. They will never suffer the cruelty we face today. Leora's voice was quiet, but resolute. Sienna's story ends here, but her legacy will live in every heartbeat, every moment, every choice of these children. Sterling and Sloane had nothing left, only the truth of a woman they had underestimated, a plan they could not break, and a future they could no longer touch. The mansion was quiet now, filled only with life, hope, and the enduring love of a mother who had given everything for her children. Cyrus whispered, looking at the triplets' tiny faces, "You'll know the strength of your mother, her courage, her love. And one day you'll understand why she had to leave to protect you." Leora's eyes met his, a faint smile of acknowledgement. "Her plan is complete, her legacy unshakable, and no one can undo the life she created for them." The room exhaled, the weight of the past lifted, the promise of the future shining brightly. As Cyrus gently rocked the triplets, he noticed a final painting on the nursery wall, a portrait Sienna had painted of him holding the children, her eyes filled with quiet pride. He whispered softly, tears sliding down his cheeks, "They'll know how brave their mother was, and they will live in the world she dreamed for them." The camera of the mind could almost see Sienna's presence linger, serene, victorious, her love and foresight eternal.